Hello, everybody. Today, I'm very excited to introduce to you Zsolt Bognár. So Zsolt is a pianist, musician, writer, and he's the host of this incredible series of discussions with musicians called Living the Classical Life. And I have followed a number of his interviews with musicians, and they're absolutely outstanding. And I want to learn from you. What is the secret that you do such? You are the best of the best. And actually, you were the one who really started all this first, didn't you? I mean, now everybody and his dog, like me, are interviewing people. But you were there and doing it before all this happened. How did it come about? And where do you get the talent to do that?
Well, thank you so much, Leila. First of all, I have to say that the whole project was accidental. I never had the idea that let's have a show and I'm the host. I'm probably too shy of a person to put myself forward in that manner, but it's coming up on our 10th year of project. I say our because, yes, it's a lovely team with whom I work, and we are coming up on 100 episodes of the show.
My goodness.
I would have never guessed that this would become such a major part of my life. I was in conservatory for many years studying with Sergei Babayan, fantastic pianist. And
Yes.
I never would have guessed that I would have a platform to speak with various performers and musicians, not just performers, really anyone in the musical field. We have concert presenters, we have recording engineers, we have producers, anyone in the musical life, just to give a sense to musicians and general audiences alike what goes into this world. And that made me so curious about you and this extraordinary series that you've created, because I know it's not the easiest thing, and to create such a beautiful community as you have and pull them all together, especially at a time like this, is no small challenge.
Well, so actually, we have one thing in common, and that is when we started out, neither of us had any idea that it would grow into something substantial, dare I say. So, but when you first started with these interviews, did you already have a team that you worked with? What was the actual genesis, and who was the first person you ever talked to?
I have to say that the executive producer of the show, one of 4 that we have, started out as my German language teacher at Case Western Reserve University, which is where I took my academic courses when I was studying in Cleveland in conservatory. And so I stayed in touch with this extraordinary woman, Jutta Ittner, who is German. And we at some point stayed in touch, and she and her husband started coming to my concerts, and then they wanted to figure out something they could do to help support me as a performer. And they said, well, do you have a website? And I said, well, no. So she says, why don't you find someone to put it together, and then we give you a website. And I said, well, that sounds fun. And she said at some point, well, why don't we put together some content so that for people who are not familiar with you, on the front page, we can have maybe a little introductory video where you introduce yourself, say a little bit about your activities, and then maybe play a little bit. I said, well, okay, I'm a little nervous about that, but let's try something. And so within the family are some filmmakers. So her husband, John, his son, Pete, is our main camera guy and editor. And they're based in New York City, which is subsequently where we film mostly. And so we started filming this thing, which was supposed to be about me and my website. So we started filming in Cleveland, where I live, and in Oberlin, and in New York City later. And it started to look like I wasn't really speaking about myself. I was on camera trying to show something about myself, but I didn't really know what to do. And I found it really fantastically awkward. I was nervous. And so I said, well, why don't I have myself interacting with my musical colleagues and friends? And what happened is, in the absence of talking points, I just started asking them about their lives. And I I think it's no accident that it morphed into that direction, because I grew up as an interview junkie. I loved hearing Terry Gross on National Public Radio and her interviews, even Oprah, this
Yes.
kind of thing. And then there was one in particular that inspired me inside the Actors Studio with James Lipton, where
Right.
he would bring on prominent actors, talk about their
Yes.
work, their lives, and their process. Then I realized it's not just about films and acting. They're really talking about life. And they're
Yes.
talking about how they have overcome adversity and self-doubts. And I said, well, wow, this is really similar to what we go through as musicians, all the different mountains that we try to climb on a daily basis. It's a daily challenge, daily battle. And I never thought that I could do something similar. I didn't think I would have a platform. But one day Pete said, well, Zsolt, I'm not sure that the material really works in the way that we envisioned. I've recut the material. This could be a show. There's an idea here, maybe. Why don't you have a look? And I loved the idea because the spotlight was no longer on me. I could just turn the tables, ask my friends something, and then try to draw out a message that hopefully will be interesting to the viewer. So we released 4 episodes filmed as such before we knew we had the concept. So the first was the cellist Joshua Roman, who...
Sure.
Yes, so some years ago... Oh my goodness, okay, so you're familiar with what a dynamic and diverse talent he is. He was, I believe for 2 years, the youngest principal cellist of the Seattle Symphony.
Yes.
And we were classmates in the same freshman class here at Cleveland Institute of Music.
Oh.
So there was that. And then we started going forward. And I said, well, who could we invite onto the show? Well, my upstairs neighbor at the time was Daniil Trifonov. And so I invited, so we were studying with the same teacher. So
yes,
I said,
course.
Yes, and I said, would you come on to the show? And he had no clue what my project was about. We had nothing to show for it at that time. At the same time, I invited Stephen Huff, who has been a longtime friend of mine, and he says, well, sure. And he also went out on a limb as a leap of trust, because I, again, didn't have any episodes to show him saying that this is what we're doing. Shortly after we released Daniil's episode, Yuja Wang saw the episode and she says, well, could I be on the show too? It's amazing what you did with Daniil. It was so intimate and confessional. She says, can you do that with me too? And I said, well, wow. Okay. So that's how it got started. But Leila, I have to say, back to your original question, how do I do it? I'm still finding it surprising that I would do this because, again, I grew up as such a shy kid, and eventually I had to realize, especially now subsequently, it's easier to look back. I realized that whatever the message is, other performers can learn something that is so central to their musical trajectory. I find that with all of the guests we've filmed, so many of them face the same self-doubts, the nerves on stage. So how do we all deal with that? Well, I would just simply ask them. And I say, after you graduate from conservatory, how do you start developing concerts? And how do you start building a career trajectory, for lack of better word? So I would just ask them, and they all had thoughts. And it really was amazing to learn that almost all the performers, with the exception of one, suffered from stage fright. And that was Rachel Barton Pine, the violinist. And she said, there's a caveat, which is that she does know what that feels like when she has to do public speaking. So she feels the pain. She feels the pain.
Interesting.
As for leading these conversations, well, that's the other thing. People call it an interview show, but I don't like it to be so one-sided as for me to just sit there and ask a whole list of questions that I've prepared. Yeah. I really like it to be a back and forth conversation. And I think there might be an advantage for me being a musician, that I can a little bit cater some of the questions to the specifics of being an instrumentalist and a performer. But I also want it to be accessible to anyone who wants to listen, who's just a music lover, for example.
It's so interesting. You've already, in this little short time, you have touched on so many aspects of things that all of us have to deal with, musicians, presenters, managers. And a couple of days ago, after 40 years of being in the business, I embarked upon something I've never done before, and that was videoing and recording two young pianists who are from British Columbia originally, but who who were supposed to be back at Juilliard. So one of the young pianists who I'd said, look, I'd like to talk to you just for 5 minutes so that the audience who will listen to the recital will get to know you a bit better. Well, it turned out that he's exceptionally nervous about speaking. And listen, he's good looking. He's a fabulous young pianist. He's smart as all get out. He has absolutely no reason to be terrified. And I said to him, so he asked me if he could see the questions ahead of time. And I said, sure. And the point being that it's interesting to me that somebody who has so much talent is so good to look at and has all those other things, is terrified of talking to the public. Now, unfortunately, and this is why I'm saying this, I think in this day and age, talent is only one part of making a career, isn't it?
Yes, Leila, and wouldn't you agree that it's also a fascinating contradiction that these, especially the younger ones who haven't had a lot of experience doing this, they have so much to say, obviously, but haven't necessarily had a lot of practice or opportunities to say it verbally.
Yes.
They say it well through their music, but they do wish to share something. But then there's this question of how to bring this forward. So with keeping in mind that level of discomfort that people might feel, I try, when I'm face to face with them in conversation, I really try to establish a non-threatening, safe space in which they can feel comfortable just to say whatever they wish. And I try to make them feel that I am a non-threatening, non-aggressive presence. And I really try through various body language and verbal cues to let them know that I'm really listening to them and hearing them and playing off whatever they are saying so that they forget to be nervous. That's the general idea.
Particularly nowadays, I think that these young musicians, as they're making their careers, need to be able also to communicate in a verbal way. I mean, I'm not saying they have to sit on stage and tell the audience about the pieces they're going to play, unless that's something that's their passion. But to expect an artist to talk to the audience if they're uncomfortable, I think is a terrible thing to do. So it's striking that balance, I think.
Yes, well, in fact, that's how I started to become a little bit more comfortable with speaking and connecting verbally with an audience. In smaller recital settings, I always loved to say a little something from the stage and just say, this is why I love this piece and this is what you can listen for. And even more seasoned concert goers, they tended to be grateful for that. They said, I thought I knew that piece, but that was a really interesting tool with which I could go through the listening experience. So I would start there, and I just kept on doing it from the early days of being really nervous doing that, and then just realizing that this communication, it's really about connecting.
Isn't it? Yes.
Yeah, it's about connecting. And these days, especially given the fact that not everyone is going to have a super extensive background in the repertoire or even the tradition of going to concerts, as, for example, maybe in Europe, it's a little bit more. I think people really want the chance to integrate the artist as a focal point. It's not just about going to a piano recital, let's hear all the great standards, here's a program of Beethoven sonatas. It's not just about that. They want to take an interest in the performer. What are their lives like? What are they like as personalities? And people really respond to that on the level of heart. That's my feeling.
There's one question I'm dying to ask you, and I know because of my exceeding old age, I'll forget. And that is, have you ever sat down to interview someone and you've suddenly realized, oh God, this isn't going to work because they're not talkers at all?
Yes, it did. In fact, it did happen to me once where I really try. It usually was in the direction of younger performers who haven't necessarily done an interview.
Yeah.
And by the communications ahead of time, I can get a sense of who's the most nervous, who wants the questions ahead of time. And I do a lot of research going forward for these filmed features, but it's not really about a list of questions that I go down. In fact, great preparation doesn't necessarily translate to a better conversation, I have found. So I do the preparation, but in the moment I play off of whatever they're saying. And so it's a bit of an improvisation. It feels a little bit like a performance to me. And if the performer, or if our guest has been nervous ahead of time, I generally try to take them out for a meal ahead of time, just to give a sense that my team it's a small production, and we are really doing this for the love of the message. But there was one instance where I really couldn't put the guest at ease, and I really tried hard. I used every trick in my bag, but with some creative editing, it's possible to put something forward that hopefully shows their best sides, and that's my only hope. But it is also part of the artist's journey that we can only meet people on the level at which they are prepared to engage. And that's part of the life journey. That's a human journey. That's a musical journey. And I think these things go hand in hand. I love that quote from Franz Liszt that he said, learning to become a great musician is learning to become a great human being. And that has always been a fun guiding thought.
By the way, and I this is typical of me, I jump all over the place. I would actually kill to talk to Stephen Huff, who made his Canadian debut on our series and who's been back a number of times, one of which was a very notable visit with Stephen Isserlis, and they're known as PH and V. And I will tell you, I mean, people keep saying to me I should write a book.
Absolutely must.
But I'm not vain enough to think that, number one, I have the ability to write a book where my writing's not that wonderful. I'm a very good talker, but I'm not a good writer. And secondly, maybe it can only be published 15 years after I'm dead, because there'll be 5,000 million people waiting to sue me.
I would certainly read it, but I know what you're talking about, the publishing it 15 years later. I'm thinking about Mark Twain's humongous set of memoirs. He actually specified that please don't publish this until 100 years after I die. And that's what happened. And that's because he had, well, I think about this for myself. I've had close proximity to a lot of the great and legendary artists, but I see things that I have the privilege of having witnessed, but it is also extraordinarily private. So I think to myself, do I really have permission or the rights to share an insight like that of some extraordinary moment? For example, I spent a lot of time behind the scenes with Martha Argerich. So I grew up collecting her recordings and idolizing her. And in several summer settings, the Lugano Festival and the Martha Argerich Project, I was there. Yes. I was turning pages for her and Sergei Babarin when they were working together. I witnessed their rehearsals and their recording sessions, and just so many fantastic human moments. And I thought to myself, well, some of these, maybe it's just for me and remembering these special moments. I don't really know the answer to this, but if you do write your memoirs, I'm the first person lining up to get a signed copy.
Yes, I mean, I so understand what you say. There are personal moments that one wouldn't share with other people because they're just so deeply connected to the artist.
Well, there's one that I'll share really quickly, because I had permission to do so, and I recently shared it elsewhere. But Sergei and Martha were preparing a new program of transcriptions of Prokofiev from Romeo and Juliet. Sergei was making the arrangements, and it was a new program, difficult, and Martha didn't have so much time to learn it. They were in the middle of rehearsing, which, by the way, all the rehearsals started around 11 p.m. and didn't stop until the sun came up. So it was really extraordinary. I had to adapt my daily rhythm. And so at some point, the Prokofiev started going better. But Martha still seemed really nervous. And she stopped and she says, "Oh, Sergei, I'm really nervous and I'm stressed." I says, "Why, what's the matter?" And she says, I'm performing the Beethoven First Concerto in 4 days, and I really haven't even touched it in a long time. I haven't brought it back. And so what Sergei did was, without missing a beat, from memory, he played the orchestral part and he just started it. And then they did a complete run through, and she just played it like that. And then she says, I'm still missing too much of it. Let's try that again. So they did it again. And then they stopped, and without a word, Sergei just started improvising a tango, and she got up and started dancing to it. That was a graceful moment that I'll never forget. And then without a word, she sat back down, and then they continued the Prokofiev. It was as if they just felt the flow of this is what needed to happen. And I said, I wish I could tell everyone about this moment, because it was about trust and friendship and human connection. And eventually,
totally.
And so these are the types of insights that I wonder, do I have permission to share that? And I'm glad that this one in particular I could share, because it was about creativity. It was about finding the moment and trying to put another friend and fellow performer at ease.
There are so many things. I mean, we sent out an e-newsletter yesterday, and the music critic from the Washington Post had written, I think over last weekend or a few days earlier, I thought he expressed it so beautifully about his challenges with online performances. And what he talked about was the lack of applause. It's funny because there are so many different ways of interpreting silence. So
yes,
when we talk about, you talk and Bronfman talks about, he earns the money for being on this, being on the stage, no, for standing in line and stuff like that. Whenever we present a concert, I can tell how the concert is going by the silence. When you can start to actually feel the silence, because the silence of a rapt audience is a very physical kind of silence. And I say, I get paid the big bucks for the silence at the end of the performance.
And I do speaking of how we present and who we choose to present, I can't possibly let this conversation go by without turning the tables a little bit and asking you a little bit about your vision, because I know that part of your series and its mission, yes, you've included living legends, but you've also given voice to performers who haven't had a chance to develop a name yet. So in a world in which so much depends on making sure the numbers line up and making sure you can sell this to an audience, how do you do this? How do you make it work? How do you connect with your trusting community and public that this is someone worth paying attention to and give them a chance? I'm so curious to know this.
I'm so glad you asked that question. Okay, so let me tell you, there are many answers to that. The first thing is, I feel so very lucky because I've had many boards of directors over the years as we've gone along. We're a small group. There's 4 or 5 of us in the office, if you count the bookkeeper as well, who comes in once a week. But I have never, ever, God bless everybody, I've never had a marketing director or a board who said to me, you can't do that because it won't make money. Never, ever has anybody told me. So we have taken risks. I mean, this organization was founded to present the next generation of great artists. And Joachim Bronfman came in that first year, Shlomo Mintz, Peter Unjian. The second year, Andras Schiff made his Canadian debut. I mean, it's Vengerov made his Canadian debut, Cecilia.
Oh my
I mean,
goodness.
I can just go on and on and on. And furthermore, when I booked Cecilia for the first time, I said to my board, I'm not going to put her at the Playhouse, which is 600 seats, because I think she's too great, she's got to go into the Orpheum, which was 2,700 seats. And my board said, are you crazy? I said, no, I'll go and stand on the street corner and I'll do my darndest to sell every seat in that house. Well, in the end, we sold 1,900 seats, which is pretty bloody marvelous.
That's incredible.
Because I wanted 1,900 people to go home and say to their friends, you bloody fool, you missed the concert of a lifetime. And that's exactly what happened. And furthermore, when I booked her, sorry, I'm getting so, I booked her. And before she even came, I called her manager again and I said, Jack, I want to rebook her the next year. He said, Leila, she hasn't even been to you yet. No, but I want to rebook her. Leila, why don't you just let her do the concert and then we'll talk right off? No, but what happens if she gets very famous and Vancouver's the other end of the earth and I want to rebook her. He said, oh, God, okay, I give up. so we rebooked her even before she sang that first concert. So, of course, when she came back, that house was filled to overflowing and we were turning people away. Again, everything I do is instinctual. There's nothing planned or intelligent or anything about it. But I just have this funny feeling that once we do get going again and the doors are open, people are hungry for this live music and they will come back maybe in even greater numbers than before, because maybe even people who are not used to going into concert halls and who have watched the stuff online, younger people, maybe they'll be tempted to come.
Yes, well, I can only speak for myself that I will be one of those who is additionally thirsty for the experience in both capacities, as performer and as audience goer. And I'm so excited to hear all of my favorite performers. And I wish you all the success in navigating this challenging period. I feel your pain. I also run a concert series in Cleveland, Music from the Western Reserve. And it's the same thing. We're finding that all of our audience is saying that they want to wait until there's a vaccine, until they will happily resume coming to concerts.
Well, you know what? All I can say to you is, number one, thank you for your time. Number two, thank you for coming into my life. And number three, this ain't the end. We'll continue talking.
Oh, thank you, Leila. It's been such a pleasure having this conversation with you. Thank you for coming into my life. And thank you so much for your kind words and belief and support in what I'm doing. And I look forward to the world returning to a more normal state and we can have a nice coffee or meal together.
I agree.
In person.
Totally. Absolutely. Take care.
Thank you for having me. And until next time.
Pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.